problem with the testing is, as I said, if we test 350 million people, you'll say, no, we want them to have a second test or a third test or a fourth test. Not everybody believes as strongly as some people on testing.
3 months into this pandemic, fewer than 2% of all of us Americans have been tested for coronavirus. Medical experts say that number needs to be a lot higher before restrictions can be lifted. There's a new report from NPR that suggests one of the big-name rapid COVID-19 tests, one the president is fond of talking about, may not be reliable, producing a false negative rate of 15%. With that, we welcome to the broadcast Dr. Mario Ramirez. He's an ER doc currently treating COVID-19 patients, also former acting director for the White House Office of Pandemic and Emerging Threats, helping lead the Obama White House Ebola response. So, doctor, this is the Abbott quick turnaround test. It's received a lot of attention for good reason, but a 15% error rate, an 85% rate of correct results, seems to me that's high enough to throw out the whole sample. Am I wrong?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, and there's a couple of things to put into context here. So it's not surprising that there are some errors in the testing. We see this with any test that we do in medicine. In fact, a lot of the testing that we do is a matter of sort of balancing probabilities against patient histories and patients' symptoms. What is concerning is that this was not sort of worked out before this test came to market. Now, this study that showed this 85% sensitivity rate was produced under certain conditions by the Cleveland Clinic, and they compared 5 different tests under conditions where they were transporting the samples in something called viral media, which is essentially a solution that we use to transport samples that we're going to test. Abbott has essentially said that that media should not be used, and that when the samples are taken directly from the patient to the machine, that the machine works as it should. But this, I think, is really where we get down to this question of theoretical testing and the sort of strategic level testing capability in this country against what that means at the sort of tactical and implementation level. And so what that means for patients on a day-to-day basis, is that if your test was only 85% sensitive, that might mean that as many as 15 out of 100 tests are wrong. So as we start to think about people going back into the workplace or going back into sort of big public areas, how confident can we be that those people around us have tests that are truly negative? And if we can't have that 100% certainty, then that means that we probably need to be testing people over and over and over again. And that's how we arrive at these numbers where some people say that we need between 5 to 10 and up to 20 million tests a week, because we need to run those iterations over and over again, because the true sort of accuracy of these tests in practice is much lower than it looks like from the manufacturer.
If we need to do that kind of thing before we can think about freeing up parts of this country, that's one thing. Let me also ask you about this troubling so-called second wave prediction. Do you think it's inevitable? Is it organic, or is this part up to us depending on how we behave and react right now?
So we know that coronaviruses and influenza viruses, although from different families of viruses, tend to behave similar in some ways. And we know that these viruses tend to decrease in frequency during the summer months. That's probably linked to temperature, humidity, but anecdotally, that's why we all get sick more often in the wintertime, because these viruses come back and last longer in the wintertime. Based on prior epidemics and prior pandemics, we have every reason to believe that this coronavirus should come back this wintertime. Now, the question that you're asking, though, is whether the behavior that we take now affects what that second peak looks like. The behavior that we're instituting now determines how big the peak is right now. But there's no reason that that second wave shouldn't necessarily come back, and the size of that wave is going to depend on how naive the population is to the virus when it comes back.
Wow. It's not always pleasant, but we ask you for the answers and you deliver. Dr. Mario Ramirez, thank you for coming on. We'd like to call upon your wisdom and guidance again if we can.